Thank you for staying with us. Now we're looking at the International Day Against Drug Abuse. According to the 2020 World Drug Report by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes, about 35.6 million people suffer from drug use disorders globally. This is quite a lot. It's that time of the year we raise awareness on drug abuse and illicit trafficking. The theme for this year is Better Knowledge for Better Care. The hashtag for those on social media is Facts for Solidarity. So join the conversation, Facts for Solidarity, hashtag. To help us understand what this is all about and what we should be doing to gain better knowledge for better care is Ms. Hachette Virk, Project Coordinator, Response to Drugs and Related Organized Crimes in Nigeria. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Virk.
Thank you. Also
here is Mrs. Maria Mfon Ilubuhi, Counselor and Founder of Shelter NGO. Thank you, of the Shelter NGO.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Let me start with you, because you're a counselor.
Yes, I am.
And you've been dealing with this kind of situation in your organization. Tell us what the situation is like. Drug use and abuse.
Drug use and abuse in Nigeria is something that should concern us. Yes. So we had the national survey report, the household survey report of the survey was done between 2016 and 2017. The report actually came out in 2018, and I think it was launched in 2019. So it gave us a figure of the people who use drugs in Nigeria, and that's about 14.3 million people use drugs. So that is huge.
Indeed, it is. The question, 14.3 million people use drugs in Nigeria. Ms. Virk, when you say use drugs, is that regular? I mean, some people just go buy Panadol or something. That's not the drugs we're talking about.
No, we are
so let's clarify.
No, we're talking about using drugs for recreational purposes. It could be illicit drugs, but it could also be, and I think that's the more worrying bit as well, it includes actually that as well. So it includes, we have a large number, nearly around, I would say 4 million, over 4 million people who are using tramadol, for example, but not using it for the purpose that it's meant for, but using it to get high. So they're using it for recreational purposes, which obviously then has a big health consequence as well. So there is, it isn't just the illicit drugs that the report covers. Mm-hmm. It also covers so-called licit substances that are used for purposes that they're not meant for.
Okay, so that report talks about 585,000 that died in 2017 or thereabout in relation to drug use, up to 1/4 from 2008. Those people using these drugs, right? Is it a question of knowledge or a question of enforcement of law that led to these increasing numbers?
So, like, maybe you would say if these people knew, if they knew that they shouldn't use drugs, then they wouldn't have used drugs. So I don't think knowledge alone is enough, because when we talk of drug use, there are other things you have to consider. Though over the years, we've always been talking about knowledge. People need knowledge. If they had adequate knowledge, then they would do better. If they had adequate knowledge, then they would stay away from drugs. But knowledge alone is not enough, because there are other risk factors for drug use. So you could have, for instance, personality traits. You could have mental health issues. You could have family neglect. You could have a community, for instance, a poor and marginalized community. You could have people who are not attached to school or attached to their communities. So a lot of things, they are both biological and environmental factors. So knowledge is good, but we have seen that knowledge alone does not change behavior.
The theme for this year's International Day for Against Drug Abuse is better knowledge for better care. If knowledge alone is not enough, why are we choosing this theme, and how does this theme play in ending drug abuse?
That's a great question. And one of the things we see is, and just to carry on from where Maria left off, is that these deaths are also caused because people don't have knowledge that they can actually get help. So we, for example, in Nigeria, when we got into this COVID-19 and there were restrictions like everywhere in the world, we work with a large group of physicians and healthcare workers. And we've launched something called the Drug Help Net, and which is basically people have volunteered, Nigerian physicians have volunteered to say, say, we will help the drug use community who have traditionally come to hospitals for help. So now, you know, we've widely advertised this drug help net. People can pick up the phone and get help. But I think the knowledge is also knowing where to get help. If you look at the drug use survey report in Nigeria, there's a large proportion of people who don't even know where to go and don't know that they can get help. So knowledge isn't only about preventing, but it's like, if I'm using, what do I do now? So knowledge is also about that. So it's really getting factual knowledge out to people so that it can help them to make logical decisions. And, you know, obviously family members or drug users in crisis can reach out to the drug help net as well.
Okay, in all of this, there is the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency,
Yes.
and we have the Secretary, Shadrach Haruna, joining us from our Abuja studio. Mr. Haruna, the matter of drug abuse, drug use and abuse in the country. Now, you've heard the figures. I mean, Ms. Ilubui talked about 14.3 based on the report that was launched in 2019. Your organization has been chasing after, I mean, you have many reports of intercepting certain levels of drugs here and there, but at the end of the day, how do we get to the point where knowledge makes for better care?
Thank you very much. But I think I lost you towards the end of your questions. But I think I had you up to the extent is, what do we do? Or how do we get to where we are, given the statistic which have just been given by our colleagues in Lagos office? Well, if I may just answer the first part of your questions, and probably you have to go back to the second part, which I did not hear. It is true that we have a huge problem when it comes to drug use in Nigeria. And the research findings, which had just been explained by our colleagues in Lagos office, is what we have been working on. And in fact, without the agency, which is specifically fighting drugs, I know that it would have been more than this. But the federal government, in their own wisdom, decided to see how to curb this problem by setting up NDLEA. And NDLEA has been working so hard on this issue as a specialized police in the enforcement of drug issues. They have done so well, if I may say. If you know the expertise in NDLEA, our investigating officers, our prosecutors, our forensic analysts, and even our counselors, they're very good in their work. And if you look at the statistics of convictions, interdictions, and seizures they have made since the inception of this agency, you know that this country would have been worse for it if we don't have NDLEA fighting these drugs currently. And like I said, if you can repeat the last part of your questions, I'll probably go back to it again. But I tell you that the problem we have in Nigeria is huge. And we're doing everything possible to see how to stem the tide. You can see that even during lockdown, the COVID lockdown, our agents, our operatives were working. And they did a lot, they made a lot of seizures from different parts of the country, particularly those ones being hauled to the areas of insurgents and extremist group. We had so many seizures from the hinterlands going towards the northeast. And my chairman was on this channel just about a few days ago, and he gave you the statistics on how drugs fuel terrorism, violent extremism, and so many cultism in this country. And we know how it has permeated every home, permeated schools as well. And then what we are doing, working hard with collaborators as well as partners like UNODC and some.
Mr. Haruna, we'll take a moment, and when we'll come back, we'll go back to that question of how can we curb this? Because with all the expertise you talked about, with the knowledge that's being put out there, with all the organizations that are working hard to say, okay, we can curb this thing, to educate the people and provide help, the numbers appear to continue to rise. How do we curb this? We'll look at that when we come back from this break. Please stay with us.
Out of the nation's over 200 million people, about 70% constitute the youths. And over the past 1 year, nearly 15% of the adult population in Nigeria, which is around 14.3 million people, reported a considerable level of use of psychoactive drug substances. The highest level of drug use, according to a report by the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, was recorded among people between 25 to 39 years. While cannabis is identified as the most widely used drug, sedatives, heroin, cocaine, and a non-medical use of prescription opioids are also noted. This, according to the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, poses a challenge to the nation.
We have a prevailing 14% drug abuse problem, which is like 5 times more than is available or obtainable in all other countries of the world. Generally, it is 5%, but in Nigeria, it's 14.3%.
The theme for this year's International Day Against Drug Abuse is Better Knowledge for Better Cure. A psychologist, Abby Goodman, says lack of adequate enforcement is responsible for the rise in the number of youths who use them.
There is no recreation center for the children, so obviously a lazy man, an idle man, what's he going to do? Turn into drug frustration, no job. So it's a problem in Nigeria. It's something we really need to look into and, have a public opinion, not just the government anymore, because if government are not doing enough, we need to come together as a citizen, both our home in diaspora, and save our country.
To mark the day in Abuja, members of the Nigerian Medical Association drew the attention of parents to the shocking statistics and called for their support in managing the condition of those already affected by drug abuse.
Parents, pay attention to your children. Make sure they're not being abused. Don't neglect them. Give them the attention. Engage them. Talk to them about drugs, about all the temptations and the evils that are out there. And then once somebody starts using drugs, all of us can tell that this person is acting differently. We need to seek medical treatment right away. And we have people who are trained to treat drug abuse.
The effect of drug abuse on any nation is unquantifiable. The challenge is therefore before government, civil society organizations and parents to act fast in reducing this trend before it becomes a national emergency.
Thank you for staying with us. So we have Ms. Verk here, Mrs. Ilubui, and Mr. Haruna from our Abuja studio, and they've all talked about what's being done. Mr. Haruna has talked about the amount of expertise at the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency and how much of interceptions that have been going on. And Ms. Verk, before Mr. Haruna came on, you talked about the need for knowledge and how much knowledge can help. But we notice that the numbers continue to rise. For instance, in 2018, 260 million people used drugs, increasing by 30% from 2009. That's not good. So with all the knowledge and help provided and all of that, why are the numbers still rising?
I mean, that's, again, a good question. And I want to second what Mr. Shadrach Haruna says. There is a lot of expertise. The figures that you're quoting are global figures. And there is a lot of expertise globally. There's a lot of expertise in Nigeria. But obviously, we need to do more. And the reason we need to do more is expertise is concentrated, let's say, in NDLEA, is concentrated in the Ministry of Health, people like Maria who have it. But we have to make this expertise available to the public as well. Well, the thing is, while there is a lot of expertise in the country, we need to do more.
No, the question I asked was, why are the numbers rising? Because if we're not able to answer the why, then we may not know the how.
I agree. And I think the numbers rise. If you look at the global figures, for example, what the World Drug Report does say is drug use is going higher, is increasing in developing countries versus developed countries. And one of the reasons for that is that they have younger populations, for example. So we need data to understand why this is happening. So, and part of the reasons we know that numbers are increasing is actually because we have better surveys. Last year, Nigeria carried out its survey, the survey that Maria alluded to, and so did India. And these are both very populous countries. When they got better data, global figures went up as well. So I think sometimes it's about just getting better information. Sometimes it's understanding demography. But also, I think we do need to appreciate that you need to put in funding into this issue as well. The World Drug Report talks about how globally aid on drug issues has decreased in the same decade that drugs has gone up. So the question would be, you know, the European Union in Nigeria has been very generous with their support to the country. That's the project I work on. But we also would, you know, and we know that the government of Nigeria, the president himself has set up a committee to look into drugs. But this also needs to match the funding that NDLEA and other ministries and other departments and CSOs receive. NDLEA's funding, and I'm sure Mr. Shadrach Haruna will talk about this, you know, has not been increasing. And there is obviously need for that as well, so that they can adequately respond. I mean, the expertise is there, but then what?
Ms. Dubé, what do we do?
Okay, so what Mr. Shadrach said was very important, using the supply reduction method to ensure that drugs are not manufactured, or there is a disruption where there is a manufacture, illicit trafficking is checked, and then, of course, there are controls and regulations on controlled drugs and even illicit substances. But I don't think that is enough, because one, in Nigeria, like Hachette said, the funding isn't that good. But even in places where there is a lot of funding, for instance, in the US, as of 2015, yes, there was a federal funding for their drug control to the tune of $25 billion US. That same amount was also given to the state. So you would think that there will be a decrease. You would think it would be difficult to find drugs in the streets. It would be difficult for the traffickers to operate. But the reverse was the case. What happened? The prices of the drugs dropped, and the purity went up. Normally, when you have a scarce commodity, for instance, fuel, you know there will be adulterations, the price will go up, but this was very different. So that shows that supply reduction alone is not the way to go. So we should also look at other avenues of curbing this issue. We should look at drug demand reduction. All the activities, all the programs that we do to ensure that young people don't even start doing drugs. And then this will also include educational and prevention programs. And then how about those who are already using drugs? We should be looking at harm reduction, whereby the people who are using drugs can still function, can be alive, can be useful, can support their families despite their drug use.
You know, I asked the question, why are the numbers increasing? Why is the demand appearing to increase, the demand for drugs, especially in the developing countries?
I would say population. I would say we have better data, like Hachette said. I would say we are looking more seriously into these issues. Probably these things have been there, and without data, we can't really say what has been happening. And of course, we know that if you look at the people who use drugs the most, according to the National Household Use Survey, they are in that range of 25 to 39 years. Yes, these are young people.
Why are they using the drugs? You know,
okay.
In leadership training, we said if you know the why, you'll understand how and when and where. So why are people even using the drugs?
People use drugs for different reasons. Okay. So we cannot give a blanket reason, one theory as to why people use drugs. There are different reasons. Some use drugs to cope with their problems. Some use drugs to improve their moods. Some use drugs to deal with their mental health issues. Some are just self-medicating. They don't want to go to the hospital. They feel they can do it by themselves. Some use it for recreation. Some use it, especially for young people, out of rebellion. Most times, yes.
Some to boost their self-esteem.
Yes, so
Mr. Haruna,
a lot of reasons.
Mr. Haruna, at the end of the day, the question is, we talked about how to curb the two ladies here have alluded to how to curb the use of drugs and the abuse of it, as the case may be. In the NDLEA, Ms. Verk has talked about funding for the NDLEA hasn't increased, but yet you've been doing more interceptions and all of that. So tell us, what do we do to curb this whole thing? Understanding the why will
Well,
help.
thank you very much. I think the reasons advanced by my colleague in the studio with you, they are very apt, because if you say why are they using drugs, it's something that Mrs. Eligbuhi has actually answered some of those questions. But how to curb this is what we have done. We've conducted our research, and we know that knowledge is one of the areas we can actually use to curb the drug demand reductions and all these issues. For instance, we discovered that the use of internet and the internet penetration in Nigeria is very high. And we have seen that so many activities are going on in the web, particularly in the dark web. We have seen that traditional drugs, which are being used before now, cocaine, heroin, cannabis, and others, we now have other ones which are being concocted locally. We have drugs which are being manufactured with the combinations of all the innocuous or prescribed drugs to become a very high potent psychoactive substance, and those ones are cheaply available to our youth. We have seen how people are buying drugs online outside the normal police enforcement duties. And we have also tried to see that we have that capacity. We have trained our officers to do the web surfing. We have trained our officers to know how to go to the dark web to see what is happening. So many of them are using Bitcoins and other virtual currencies to purchase drugs. We have seen all those things. And we have seen how drug proceeds have been laundered through virtual currencies. So these are issues that knowledge has to do with. And we have acquired that, and we are working hard. Of course, you mentioned the issue of funding. Funding is very key to our work, because all this knowledge you're talking about, acquiring the specialist investigation technique is not easy. Most of our officers are doing what we call self-training development, and they're also working with our partners like UNODC to have some training which will really equip them to go into internet surfing to see how drugs are being sold and purchased on the internet. So going to the dark net is not an easy thing. Trailing drug use, following virtual currency and all those things, particularly when you are going to the blockchains where this transaction is taking place, it's not an easy thing. And we are developing that capacity, but we need funding to do that. And how to curb it, we have come up with an idea, which of course we're going to float very soon. In as much as we need money, we also need a society to work with us. We need a whole society approach, in which case we want to see how traditional rulers, how local government chairmen, how women's societies and all other bodies can join hands to work with the agency to fight and to curb this drug. It's not easy for the federal government funding alone. It's not easy for the federal government agency alone to fight these drugs. We need a combination of all spirit-filled individuals to come out, because there's no home that will not be affected. If we wait for government alone, then of course we'll be taken by surprise the way the drug use is going. And the future of Nigeria is at stake. Issues of security is very key to us. You can see what is happening all over the country. All these are fueled by drugs. My chairman said this at the last time he appeared here, that the insurgency in the Northeast is fueled by drug, because the theater commanders have actually informed us how much of this they have recovered. Tramadol, very cheap. Cannabis is grown everywhere. So we need the policing, and we need funding to see that we have that proper policing across the country. And of course, we thank the federal government, because recently they have approved for the recruitment of more officers. And the idea of the agency is to see that these officers are disseminated in all the nooks and crannies of this country. And we now have a very strong intelligence section of the agency. We have a computer database section of the agency. We're equipping them so much to see how they can also track all this use and know how drugs are being disseminated and distributed in the country. Purchases of drug, availability of hard drugs, availability of narcotic drugs. We have also seen how it's coming up, particularly the cultivation of cannabis. And we are going about to see how we can destroy some of them, working with farmers, working with pharmaceutical society organizations, research institute, and then to see what local materials are being used to concoct high-potent psychoactive substance, which is being used cheaply within the country. You discover that if care is not taken, you have to monitor your kids, sitting down in their own house, they concoct so many things to become psychoactive substance, and they take these drugs without you knowing it. In fact, recently we have
Ms. Haruna, let me bring in the ladies here so that as we begin to wind down. Ms. Hachette-Verk, yesterday was the actual day that the Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking was celebrated, 26th of June this year, with the theme, Better Knowledge for Better Care, with the hashtag, for those on social media, hashtag Facts for Solidarity. As we wind down now, what's the way forward?
The way forward is, I think, we need to do more. We need to have better information. We need a balanced approach to deal with this issue of drugs. So a balanced approach means obviously a big focus on supply side reduction, but similarly to what Maria said, also focusing on drug demand reduction, prevention programs which focus on what you alluded to earlier, the cause of drug use. If we know, for example, that a poor family environment can lead to drug use, we need to do programs to address families. Then we need to do programs that address schools. So I would say a balanced approach, a knowledge-based approach. Do interventions that work. Don't waste your money on interventions that don't work. So, that would be the way forward.
Maria?
Okay, so I would also agree totally with Hachette that having a better knowledge, especially of the risk factors. So you were talking about why the other time. And I talked about the risk factors, and I mentioned the risk factors, and also knowing the protective factors. So that way there could be a balance. So you decrease the risk factors, and then you increase the protective factors. I think that would be very helpful for young people.
All right. Thank you very much. We're speaking with Ms. Hachette-Verk, Project Coordinator, Response to Drugs and Related Organized Crimes in Nigeria. Mrs. Maria Mfon-Ilubi, Counselor and founder of the Shelter NGO. And Mr. Shadrach Haruna, Secretary of the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, who joined us from our Abuja studio. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. We wish you well, and we hope that we can, the next time we're talking about this, the numbers will be going down instead of going up. Sorry, to be back in a moment. Just stay with us.